The term Renaissance person and polymath tend to be used interchangeably, but I think the two refer to fundamentally different types of people or lifestyles that people aspire to cultivate. And in this video, I wanted to kind of break down those distinctions and kind of share why I personally pursue the path of the polymath over that of a Renaissance person. Now, when we think of a Renaissance person, we tend to think of like Leonardo da Vinci as kind of like the quintessential Renaissance man. And I think it gets a little bit tricky because I would argue that Leonardo da Vinci was in fact a polymath as well as a Renaissance man. And so I think that there are kind of ways that people can fall into the category of being a Renaissance person and a polymath, but I do think they are still fundamentally different things. And while some Renaissance people may also be polymaths, there is definitely a distinction. So when we think of a Renaissance person, I think it's important to consider the historical context in which these types of people emerged. So the Renaissance came after the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages. So from the fall of the Roman Empire, there was this big period of history where there was kind of an economic, political, intellectual, and cultural decline. And then you have the Renaissance, and suddenly there is this emergence of an interest in living a more intellectual life. There is a thirst for more knowledge. There is an environment that is kind of enabling people to pursue cultural interests because suddenly we have a more stable economy, a more stable and flourishing political system. And so that kind of cultivated an environment where these Renaissance people were able to pursue this type of stuff. And there was just more of a general kind of promotion, I think, of cultural life for people in this time period. Polymaths, by contrast, have existed all throughout history. There are polymaths from, ancient Greece with people like Aristotle. There were polymaths during the Islamic Golden Age. There have been polymaths throughout every significant period of history. And so a Renaissance person is typically somebody who pursues a broad area of knowledge or interests, and there's typically an emphasis on both the sciences and particularly the humanities, or what we would consider to be the liberal arts. And the kind of core aim of the Renaissance person was this idea of cultural refinement. It was about kind of building one's knowledge and understanding and appreciation and skills within these liberal arts. So things like philosophy, visual arts, performing arts, all of these types of things. And this was seen as a way to kind of create cultural refinement, I think not just for individuals to kind of develop culturally, but also for the society as a whole. And this is where I kind of veer more towards polymathy, or at least one of the reasons why. And I think this idea of cultural refinement for where we are today in this current point of time and space is that cultural refinement as a goal in and of itself, to me, it doesn't seem like it's enough, because I think underpinning this idea of cultural refinement is that there is this large degree of privilege. If you were in a position where you can kind of pursue this life or this goal of cultural refinement without also lifting other people up to be able to pursue that themselves, to me, it just feels like it falls short. The thing that draws me to the polymath path, or at least one of the things, is that it's not only about this idea of self-improvement or the pursuit of knowledge, but it's the practical application of that knowledge and those skills to solving real-world issues. If we look at polymaths throughout history, there are kind of broad categories that you could kind of pop certain historical figures into if you were to kind of define them by one category. And a book that I really like is the book called The Polymath. And in this book, it kind of, in the beginning, looks at different polymaths and kind of separates them into categories like leaders, kingmakers, revolutionaries, intellectuals, educators, mystics, explorers, scientists, artists, entrepreneurs, and humanitarians. And I think rather than these being categories that kind of defined who they were as a person, I think these categories are better at kind of explaining the area or the way in which their work had an impact on the world. And That's the thing that draws me to the polymath path. It's that it's about more than just the pursuit of knowledge for our own individual benefit, but it's about the pursuit of knowledge and the application of that knowledge to solving challenges in our own communities or at a more global scale. I think just in terms of like the definition of a polymath as well, being fundamentally different to that of a Renaissance person. When we think of a Renaissance person, we could probably kind of label them more as either generalists. I think that's what was kind of, if we think about the Renaissance as a time period, these people were more kind of moving away from specialty and towards this idea of being a generalist and having a kind of broad wealth of knowledge and skills. Or a lot of the ones that we think of that may kind of fall into the bucket of being both a Renaissance person and a polymath, maybe they were more general specialists. So they had that wide kind of range of knowledge, but they also had really deep areas of specialty. Whereas the way I look at a polymath, it's more than just being a general specialist. It's not just that you have a wide range of knowledge and deep area of mastery or specialization for certain things or many things. But a polymath to me is somebody who is able to synthesize both their wide knowledge and their deep specialties in ways that they can kind of think more creatively or be more innovative and apply that knowledge to solving challenges or to apply that knowledge in the real world. That's really what I think draws me to the path of the polymath rather than just the kind of multi-passionate Renaissance person. If we were to look at kind of like the key distinctions between the two, this is how I personally would kind of define the distinctions. I would define the Renaissance person as being distinguished by a well-rounded education that kind of encompasses both the sciences and the humanities, and perhaps we would describe these people as being like multidisciplinary. I would consider them to have kind of mastery or proficiency in several disciplines, often with a really strong emphasis on artistic or creative pursuits. They have a holistic and very kind of integrated approach to learning. And if we're thinking about a Renaissance person during the Renaissance period, there was a big emphasis on this idea of humanism and Renaissance humanism. And the big focus was cultural refinement. It was about personal development and also the application of that knowledge to kind of improve society, more so in a way that it was about kind of like lifting society up in terms of, at least in my understanding, it was more about kind of social class, social capital, and kind of culturally, it was about like lifting up the society. Very different to the way I think polymaths apply their knowledge. So I would define the polymath, by contrast, as being characterized by a vast interdisciplinary knowledge base rather than just multidisciplinary or even transdisciplinary that extends across multiple fields. And polymaths typically kind of also include technical or scientific disciplines, but I don't think that's like a hard and fast rule. They have a deep intellectual curiosity that kind of drives more self-directed learning and exploration. They have the ability to synthesize their knowledge from these different domains to kind of generate more innovative solutions and ideas. And there's less emphasis on cultural refinement and kind of more on the breadth and depth of their expertise across these multiple disciplines to actually apply this in practice to kind of solving challenges in their community or the wider world. I think culturally, both the Renaissance person and the polymath are quite relevant today. I think when we think about kind of the need for more Renaissance people, you know, this is very much aligned with this idea of promoting the liberal arts and promoting kind of like a resurgence of an interest in things like philosophy, art, and these aspects of kind of culture. I think where that will fall short is when that is kind of just seen as the goal in and of itself, rather than the goal of that kind of being to kind of push ourselves to be better as individuals or a society in order to kind of promote more meaningful social change. Polymathy, by contrast, is more about embracing the paths of generalization and specialization in different ways kind of transcending the bounds of, you know, academic disciplines and things like that, in order to actually synthesize and kind of make new meanings of the world so that we can apply that to addressing social challenges. I think that both of these offer a path for personal fulfillment, and I don't think that there is any right or wrong for individuals, but for me personally, and as somebody who is like very much committed to living a life in which I want to make a positive impact on the world, and I want to engage in self-directed learning and kind of moving beyond just a career of specialization, for me, that is like the means to an end of actually having a more positive impact in the world. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this. And, you know, if you have a different interpretation of the distinctions between the two, I would love to hear it. You know, this is just kind of my interpretation of the two and how I've kind of come to understand them. I think that the term polymath is one that is maybe less known or less utilized in kind of popular culture. You know, the first time somebody called me a polymath, I didn't know what it meant. I kind of thought it was like an insult. And it was actually through the kind of comparison of a polymath to a Renaissance person that I began to kind of understand what a polymath was. But now that I've kind of really been kind of deeply exploring this path and how I can kind of cultivate my life as a polymath, I've come to kind of recognize that there are significant differences between the two, and that's kind of allowed me to decide that I want to pursue the path of a polymath. If you enjoyed this video, definitely check out the link to the article on my Substack that I wrote about this topic. If you're interested in kind of pursuing the path of a polymath or learning more about how cultivating a life of kind of self-directed learning and following your curiosities, moving beyond specialization to kind of exploring a multiplicity of areas of expertise and mastery in different areas across your life, then you would probably love my Purposeful Polymath series. I am posting regular videos at the moment, so definitely subscribe and keep an eye out for those.